let's get started. I guess folks will be joining as they join. Welcome everybody to our second to the last class of our Teaching Bell Hooks class. And I was just contemplating what it means to teach this class. I was having a conversation with folks about who Bell Hooks was, what she's meant. This last set of readings reminded me of some things and of how this class is meant to honor not only her tremendous intellect, but her phenomenal spirit, which I feel like you can actually receive and feel through her writings. And so I pray that this class has been one that honors her and honors what she's meant to this world and what she will continue to mean to this world. We are going to begin with our grounding as we do for each class. I will lift up that I'm coming at you. Again, I think this is our second class where I'm coming to you from Buffalo. So we just arrived in Buffalo this morning at about 4 a.m. And we're here doing some work, which I'm going to incorporate into what we talk about today as we talk about revolutions of the mind, body, and spirit. And so we'll be talking a little bit about that. Of course, before we begin that conversation, let's hop into, let's hop into our grounding, our land, labor, and life acknowledgement. And so we invite everyone to participate if it feels right to you. Hopefully, prayerfully, it does feel right to you to just take a moment to ground ourselves. And I hope that we all took some meditative time this week, grounding ourselves and centering ourselves in our bodies as we really invoked our spirit and our mind to engage in the visioning work that we were to do for today. And so I want to invite everyone to sit in a manner that allows you to get as much oxygen as possible. For me, that's 2 feet on the ground, with as straight of a spine as I can possibly get. And for everybody, it'll be something different. And I put both of my palms upright in my lap. And let's all take a deep breath in and release. And can someone read this first slide?
I can read it.
Okay, go ahead, Rebecca.
This land that we inhabit is physically situated in the original ancestral homelands of the Tongva people. We pay respect to the Tongva and all Indigenous people, past, present, and future, and their continuing presence in the homeland and throughout their historical diaspora.
Thank you. And let's all take another deep breath in and breathe out. Who can read this next slide?
We pay homage to those who were stolen from Africa, placed in bondage, falsely named as chattel and forced into labor, who were called slaves but never submitted as such, who have always been fully human, with an unbroken connection to the divine and to each other. We honor our African ancestors for the still unpaid labor which built what is now the Americas.
Thank you. And let's take another deep breath in. Hold it for a second and breathe out. And who can read this last slide?
I can read it.
Yes,
To both our Indigenous and African forebears, We commit to the continued struggle for liberation and reparations, for it is only through freedom and justice that we truly give honor. Ashe.
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 All right. Any new folks? Any new folks? All right, we just want to quickly review what we talked about last week, which was on the power of visioning, And in the chapters that we read for last week, Bell Hooks talks about theory. And if you all remember, we didn't really engage in this conversation, but I think it's important that we engage in the conversation. Michelle Wallace, who Bell Hooks cites throughout this text, talks about, and there's another book that we didn't read for this class, but Some of Us Are Brave, where Michelle Wallace writes about how once we are awakened, we can only pretend to be asleep. Once we're awakened, we can only pretend to be asleep. So there's a state of unconsciousness that many folks have in the world, right? Not everyone is aware of what's going on around them. And, there's sayings like ignorance is bliss. There's kind of a peace that comes from closing your eyes, right? And Bell Hooks talks about how in the classroom, as people are awakened, as they're shaken from their sleep, right? There's often a pain that comes with that. Do you all remember her saying that? There's a pain that comes with waking up. Do you all remember? Let's see. Who remembers that?
I remember that part.
Yeah. Has anybody experienced that? Like the pain that comes with waking up? Have you experienced that, Rebecca?
Yeah, definitely. I think it's changed a lot of my relationships with my family members.
Yeah. Yeah. And she talks about that, especially. You want to quickly give us an example of how you experienced it?
Yeah, I mean, I don't really know how to give quick examples of it, but I think probably a lot of people can relate to feeling very passionately about something and wanting to share it in an excited way and being met with resistance and defensiveness.
Yeah. Yeah. Bijal, your hand is up as well.
Hi, can you hear me? I'm having to
Yeah. Yeah.
So I was gonna say it's like I find it to be a very isolating feeling. Like I think there's when you're working together with people towards an end, and then you have like a you wake up to something and it's like a different experience, I think, and not everyone is there. I think it is very it triggers isolation, feelings of isolation.
Yeah, isolation. I remember I was writing an essay called Womanist Mothering, and I was still married at the time. This will give you some insight into why I'm not married. And I was writing this essay and felt compelled in writing the essay to talk about my then husband in as positive of terms as possible, right? Saying, how much easier I had it than women who were unmarried and raising our 3 children. And I was kind of lying. Well, I was saying it gently to make him feel good. And I had him read the essay. And even though I was misrepresenting how my household ran, right, around what parental care looked like, he still became really, really angry. And so that misrepresentation in the essay actually did turn into a lie around equal roles in parenting. And I did that. It was painful for me because I was torn between, I think I shared with you that my grandmother always taught us that if you lie, you'll steal. If you steal, you'll kill. And so lying is a huge deal for me, that I still feel guilty about the last lie that I consciously told, which was, about 6 years ago. And I lied in that essay. I lied in that essay because I felt torn between telling the truth and wanting to remain married, right? And wanting to have peace in my household. So there was a pain that came from waking up to my womanist self. Your hand is up, Ryan.
Yes, I can really relate to what someone said earlier about the aloneness. I actually wrote an essay. I was diagnosed with complex post-traumatic stress disorder, which is childhood trauma. As an adult, I'm married, I have 2 kids, a career, and I talked to my family about it, and then I became the scapegoat. And it's not in sick family units, it's like not unheard of to blame the person who points out like the sickness. And so I haven't talked to my family in like 2.5 years. So I wrote an essay about it, and I actually had to take it down because what happened was like, it was like not trauma informed in my writing. And I think it was like triggering to other people. And because what they did to me was like very like violent. But I didn't press charges or like get the law involved, or because those systems don't work for me. Right. And now I have to settle it my own way. And it's been really hard, but so I appreciate talking about the isolation, because once you unsee something, you can't just go back to normal again.
That's absolutely right. That's absolutely right. And that's what Michelle Wallace means, right? Like you can only pretend to be asleep, right? That's right. Thank you for sharing that, Ryan. So she talks about this pain that comes from awakening, from our own awakening, but that's also part of, our mission in life is to awaken, to constantly come into consciousness. And then she talks about theory, and we talked about it in terms of visioning, but theory as a healing mechanism, as a healing solve, right? That through theory, we get to imagine new ways of being. We get to write and imagine and think with an eye towards building new ways of being. And so I thought that was a really beautiful way of thinking about theory and valuing theory. And she's very clear that theory also needs to be accessible, right? So we should write theory in ways, and this is part of kind of your assignment around vision, write theories in ways that are accessible. So as we're writing about, as I was writing about womanist mothering, it needs to be written in a way that is relatable and accessible to other Black moms, right? And so it's important that we generate theory so that as we kind of experience these spaces of isolation and pain, we also develop remedies for our own pain and our collective pain. Does that make sense to you all? Yes, okay. I'm seeing some head nods. I'm assuming yes. Yeah. She also challenged us to live in alignment with that theory. The theories mean nothing. The visions mean nothing if we don't live in alignment with them. And I know some of you all are thinking, as you think about your homework assignment, right, to write your vision statement, well, what power do I have to dismantle every system of oppression, to build new imaginative systems? What power do I have? Well, I think one of the things that we're challenged to do, and one of your homework assignments for this week, is to think about spaces of autonomy, right? So you might not be able to build the way in which the entire world practices familial relationships, but you do have some degree of autonomy in your own family, right? Or you might have some degree in autonomy in your own family. You might not be able to say what it looks like to build a healing justice practice in the world, right? But you do have some control over your own level of healing justice, or the community that you're a part of's level of healing justice, right? You might not have the ability to completely build liberatory models of education, but those of us who are educators, in whatever capacity we're educators, have the capacity to build learning communities that she talks about, right? Liberatory learning communities. And so it's really important that we theorize to heal ourselves through the pain of becoming conscious, and we're constantly becoming conscious, stepping into greater consciousness. And it's also important, as we theorize, that we live in alignment with those theories. And that's what I mean when I say, when we think back to the last book that we read, that love is what justice looks like in private, right? So what do your private spaces look like? You might preach all of the stuff about what the world should look like, but how do you interact in the spaces that you're in? How do we interact in the spaces that we're in? How do we live the practice that we claim is the right one to move the world forward? So that's kind of what we talked about last week. And as we move into this week, I keep doing that. Let me pull this up. We want to encourage sharing of your vision statements. So we had one great share last week, and we said that more of you, oops, that's not the one I wanted to share. We said that more of you would be ready to share this week. And so as we, I shared that we're in Buffalo right now, right? And as we come to Buffalo for our second time, we're looking at what it means to end white supremacy. And so it's important that we vision and build towards an end to white supremacy and an ushering in of racial justice, of gender justice, of class-based justice, of an overarching justice in the world. And so we have to begin with a strong vision, So who has a vision that they want to share?
As I can. So always remember, in the commercial context, because you're having private parties, there's
that was something else. So who has a vision statement to share?
I have a drawing I can share.
We'll take that. Is it a
Okay.
vision-based drawing?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. It's from, I did the sit and meditate, and I just kept having this like image of a tree that was rotting and needed to be torn down and uprooted. And so I drew it out, but then I have like this idea of, you know, there are so many ways of dismantling white supremacy and all of the other things that need to happen. And looking through the different points and recommendations of it should be this and it should be this and this. And the point that stuck out to me was that it should be achievable through required collective action. So I drew a little picture of the collective action of tearing down a rotten tree. And I've been returning a bunch of artworks to my students. I teach art to elementary students, and I have some artworks of my students that I want to share too, because I think that's what we use to replace the rotten tree.
Oh, that's awesome. Let's see what you got.
Okay, here's my tree. It's all rotten and it needs to be torn down. So there's these little strings that are wrapped around and lots of hands pulling in lots of different directions. And it's a very big tree with very deep roots. And so there's a lot of work to do. But I think that helps me feel a little less overwhelmed, knowing if I can pull on one string very strongly with a lot of other people, then I can participate. And then I did this project with my students this semester where we did abstract expressionism. So we used watercolors and oil pastels to create big feelings and emotions, but with color and line. So these are from second grade students, and they're so expressive and I love them. So I was thinking, you know, what do you replace the tree with? And I think it doesn't have, I know, I love it. It doesn't have to be another tree, you know, it can be, there's so many.
Wait, say that again. Say what you just said. That's hella profound.
It doesn't have to be planting a new tree. Like it could be anything. So, you know, I just thought these were beautiful.
Are other people hit? Yeah, Kelly got, oh, shoot. Yes.
It's so pretty.
Yeah.
And this one, oh, I love this one.
A new tree. Oh, I love these. See, I don't have little kids anymore.
Oh my gosh, they're the best. They're so thoughtful.
So are these responses to what you replaced the rotten tree with, or this was just
no, that I was just looking at these today because I'm returning them to my students this week.
Okay.
But they made them by thinking about feelings that they had and how could they express them. Like what color was that feeling, or what did that line look like? Was it a soft and flowy line, or was it a really sharp and jagged line, or is it a big bright red feeling, or is it a soft pink feeling? So we talked a lot about feelings, and it was really lovely. And I think making art with children is what I do, and it can be very stressful, but it's also incredibly fun and gives me a lot of hope, because you know, you can give them a prompt and they can do something totally different. So I think that's like I think that's the vision. It's to say like, you know, as the teacher, I want to say, here's what you can do, and then I want them to do something even better or even more creative, and to have the seed of it, the idea of it, but then to take it, you know.
This is why we need artists, right? Because I don't know if people who don't think artistically would have ever come up with what you just said, right? Like, one, the tearing down of the tree was not the literal assignment, right? And neither was the kind of imaginative new creations. But that is also exactly the assignment. And I think that was incredible. That was a lot. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Anybody else? Anybody either want to give feedback or offer their vision? Eric?
I actually saw Ebony's hand flying up before me. Okay.
Did I miss hands? No.
Okay, cool. Right on. Hi, y'all. So funny enough, I've done this before. I do this frequently. I check in with my values and vision like relatively frequently. And I have a drawing that I was sort of tapping into recently, which is basically just like an image of me kicking my feet up while the sun is setting in a very natural setting. And it's more about the feeling of what that means to me. Because it is very solitary, but that feeling of, I'll just read some of the stuff I was tapping into. I kick my feet up and I'm with the sun setting over the layered hills, hilly horizon. Relaxation and serenity, knowing no one is suffering from my experiences. Paying rent if land is not back. A paper bag full of guavas from a neighbor's tree. A bag of lemons out still from my tree at the foot of the drive. We ask more than we tell. We embrace discomfort as the tunnel to the next stretch of track. We heal daily through community engagement and/or harmonious co-creation and stewardship. Humor expands beyond rarely to return to trauma and sarcasm. We sleep more than or equal to a third of our days. Our healers, poets, artists, scientists, philosophers, elders fuel our collective energies and guide our communities. We're all with the land and our mother's cycles, fully embodying our channel, our gift to it all. Thanks.
Love that. I love that. I'm looking at your face, Ebony. Do you want to offer some feedback?
Thank you. Yes. Thank you, Eric. I was really, really moved by what you shared.
I saw you be especially moved about
No.
sleeping a third of the day.
You just talked about that too. I thrive off of 6 to 8 hours of sleep. So I really envision that with you. But I was very moved by no one suffering for your comforts or anyone else's comforts. I'm not sure, I'm sorry if I misquoted you, but that really moved something within me deeply, and thank you. It was beautiful. And I also raised my hand to share mine too, but I just didn't want to go first.
Can't wait to hear it.
Thank you. Okay. So hi everybody, by the way. So I'm so happy to be here. I'm sad that we're at our second to last class, but my statement is this. I envision a world where my 5-year-old grandson Justice will grow up and never be feared or harassed or killed by anyone for being a Black boy or man. I envision a world where every single person has all of their needs met and are able to thrive being the highest vibrational versions of themselves. Everyone is healed, and future generations of all living beings are no longer damaged, in need of healing, but are honored, loved, cared for, and revered in the world that I envision. That's it. Thank you.
I love that. I love that. And I felt that. Can I challenge you just a bit, Ebony?
Sure.
The first sentence felt like it was spoken out of fear. I envision a world where my 5-year-old grandson is never, right? Isn't that what it starts with? Is never.
Will grow up and never be feared. But yes,
Right.
I put never in all caps. It is
Right.
a fear.
So I think that because of the space that we live in, especially as Black mothers and caregivers, there is this fear or anxiety, especially around our boys that we live with. And so I want us all, and I think everyone who's written something or hasn't written something, I heard this a bit in something that you said, Eric, but I didn't catch the exact sentence. To check spaces where you see a negative or a fear. So a never or a not, or, and what is the opposite of that? So what do you want to grow, Justice to grow up being? So never being seen, in fear or threatened or killed or whatever. What's the opposite of that? Right?
Okay. Yeah, thank you for that challenge.
Yeah.
So,
And I've had to challenge myself around that too, because of the hold that all of this has on us.
So I envision a world where my 5-year-old grandson lives a long, healthy life.
Yes.
His
Yes.
radiance joyful,
Yes.
brilliant self, like uplifting every space that he enters, the way he, in every person that he encounters, the way he does me and all of us who know and love him.
So I'm seeing all these hearts and people do this. Do you hear how that's so much more powerful, even for you? Like it's like your spirit feels different when you say it. Does it? Or am I reading too much through this?
Wow, you're right. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah. Yes. Love that.
Thank you.
Does anyone else have something they'd like to share? Or feedback for Ebony? We didn't do that. There's lots of feedback for you in the chat, Ebony. Anybody else
Thanks
have
for all the hearts, everybody.
Caitlin, is your hand up?
Yes, it is. I was just thinking of something that they say in somatics, which is the body learns on yes. Ebony, that reframe was so powerful and so compelling to draw people into your vision. So thank you so much.
Yes. All right. Anybody else? Okay. So here's where we are. And on the second to the last class, it's really important that we think about the scaffold, right? So we have this vision statement that we've created. And if you haven't written this vision statement, please write your vision statement. If there's no other reason for taking the class, please write your vision statement. Affirmation of this came to me day before yesterday. I think I shared with many of you that my Baba is Hank Jones, who's one of the San Francisco 8 and the wisest man that I know. And one of the only men that I've been able to actually receive love from. That, my biological father is not one that I'm close with. And, there's a lot of healing that needs to be done there. And I'm very, very grateful that I've had fathers in my life and grandfathers in my life and Babas in my life that I've been able to receive love from. Baba Hank Jones is one that I speak with almost daily. And he's been a guide for me over the last 10 or so years. And I was on the phone with him day before yesterday, just as I was preparing to leave to come to Buffalo. And he asked me, he said, do you have a vision statement? And I said, well, yes, I do. And I emailed him my vision statement. And then he called me back and said he loved my vision statement. Now, how can we make this happen? And so that's where we are in this class. How can we make this happen? How can we make the visions that we have for justice, for our children, for the generations to come? How can we bring them to pass? And so our vision statement is where we start. And then there's ways that we can break it down, because these vision statements are meant to be overarching, are meant to come to life in the form of pictures and images and photos and different ways that they manifest in our mind's eye, right? Some of us can write them in words and some of us have to draw them, but they're overarching. And so when you talk about, well, how do we manifest these visions? How do we make sure that they come to life, that they come to pass? We have to begin to break them down, right? We have to begin to think, well, what kind of educational system does Justice need for this? Justice is Ebony's grandson, right? What kind of healthcare system do we need for Justice to grow up and be healthy, physically healthy, in the world? What kind of public safety system do we need so that justice can walk through the world in freedom, right? And so those are the goals, the system level efforts. And virtually every single system must be addressed, right? So as we are in Buffalo, one of the reasons that we're here is because we are engaging in a collective national visioning session around what it means to usher in racial justice and end white supremacy, right? We know that the murders at the Tops grocery store are not just about gun control. That's not the only or even the primary solution. Really, it's a reckoning with the fact that this country is built on white supremacy, right? So we talk about systemic failures. These are not failures. These are the way that what we see in the world is the way that these systems were meant to work, right? It's meant that Black girls are pushed out of schools. It's meant that Black boys are targeted by police. It's meant that Black mothers are the poorest people in our society. It is the intention of these systems. So we must see all of these systems as being rooted in and grounded in white supremacy. We can't pretend as if those aren't the systems under which we live. So we have to look at these different systems, we have to unpack them, and then we have to have new visions, right? And as we talk about even things like individual systems, we have to then break those systems down and say, well, how do we uproot these systems? How do we build an educational system that's liberatory? One is that we have to get police out of schools, right? Two might be that we have ethnic studies as an antidote to white supremacy, as one of my mentors, Dr. Julianne Malveaux, recently wrote, right? And so we have to think about project level efforts. And then when we think about that, we have to think about our place within them. This is what we were doing. And so it's important that as we, let me stop the share. As we think about vision, that we figure out what is our place, what is our calling, where are we going to begin? Because this is not just about, again, theorizing, it's about actually doing the work. Does that make sense to y'all? So here's, in fact, let me share that last slide. Do y'all know the story of Hatshepsut? So I almost named my first daughter Hatshepsuti. Do you all know the story of Hatshepsut? Anybody? If you do, speak up if you know the story of Hatshepsut. You can just unmute if you know the story of Hatshepsut. So Hatshepsut was a female pharaoh, a woman pharaoh in ancient Egypt. She ruled somewhere around 1480 BC. And Hatshepsut had this vision of bringing together Upper and Lower Egypt, of developing a peaceful system of trade throughout East Africa, throughout Nubia, Greater Nubia. She had this vision of ruling differently than any ruler before her, and she saw herself not as a queen, but as a pharaoh, and was very, I guess we now call her audacious in rejecting the title of queen and demanding the title of pharaoh. She's the only woman to be buried in the Valley of the Kings. I had the great blessing of traveling to Egypt many years, I guess it's 20 years ago now, in 2002, and visiting her temple in the Valley of the Kings in Karnak. And so Hatshepsut had this vision But as she was visioning, it's important that we not just stay in the state of visioning. Visioning is a first step and it's a continuous step, but it cannot be the last step. I think we all know people who will share theories, share visions, share imaginings. But if those imaginings don't take root and don't manifest into something that's tangible, something that's real, they actually aren't meaningful to many others other than the people doing the imagining. Does that make sense to you? So it's important. Yeah. Ebony said, I wanted to ask if she was a king. Yes, she is. She was a king. You all can read Black Women in Antiquity by Ivan Van Sertima. Is one of the most powerful books about the role of Black women in ancient Africa, which really, sometimes we think that Black feminism and womanism is the first time that patriarchy was disrupted, right? That, it's, Bell Hooks is writing something new. No, Bell Hooks was not writing something new. We need to think about what pre-colonial African gender roles were, how pre-colonial women thought about gender and how they manifested these gender roles, right? Both in ancient Africa and in more contemporary Africa. When we think about even West Africa and, who the warriors were, right? The Dahomey warrior women. So some of y'all, everybody I'm sure has seen the film Black Panther, right? And you all think that this is just people's imaginings and, this is a great piece of fiction. This is not just Ryan Coogler's imagination. This actually comes from history, that the Dahomey warrior women were the most elite group of fighters in West Africa and most highly trained group of fighters in West Africa. And so it comes from somewhere. This idea, sometimes Black women in the Americas are attacked for being matriarchs, right? Well, I think we should challenge what matriarchy means and why here it's thought of as a bad thing, right? Nadav and other scholars who write on pre-colonial Africa talk about non-hierarchical matriarchy as something that's beautiful and positive and makes the most sense, right? That women should be the ones who set and enforce the rules of society. Women who give birth, it makes sense for them to be the makers and enforcers of rules, right? Which is what non-hierarchical matriarchy looks like in pre-colonial Africa. And so just offering the story of Hatshepsut because she had these visions, but she also had to build towards these visions. And so I think that the next challenge that we have, and I'm trying to be conscious of time, and I want us to walk through what that looks like. The next challenge that we have is to take the visions that we've all written, and if you haven't written it, your challenge is to write it, to identify a site of resistance, What does that mean? Identify a site of resistance. And in fact, let's do that now. What is a site of resistance for you? Identify a site of resistance. So where is your site of resistance?
The women's jail.
The women's jail. The women's jail is a site of resistance. Why? Why did you identify the women's jail?
Just having been incarcerated and just the treatment of women, in particular Black women, when you're incarcerated, and the level of dehumanization that you experience. And
Yes.
yeah.
I love how quickly you identified your site of resistance. I love that. I love that. Anybody else want to identify their site of resistance? What is your site of resistance? Let's do two more. Sites of resistance. And y'all might go, shoot, the battlefield is everywhere, right? Everywhere is a site of resistance. In my classroom, in my workplace, in my home, all of those are sites of resistance. Pick one. Pick one. Do you understand what I mean when I say pick a site of resistance?
Can you elaborate a little bit more, Pastor Najuma? Thank you for your example. That helped, but I was going to ask if you could give maybe a little.
Sure. So I believe and understand that all of these systems under which we live, we're constantly socialized to buy into them, to see them as legitimate, right? To see our classrooms as legitimate, to see our workplaces as legitimate, to see the media that we're fed as legitimate, to see the notion that we have to work as hard as we do as legitimate, to see traditional familial structures as legitimate, right? And so often we simply go along and we see these sites and even participate in these sites that are white supremacist, that are patriarchal, that are capitalistic, that are heteronormative. We participate in these sites rather than resisting these sites, right? So if we walk into the classroom and the chairs are all in a row, we think the classroom should have chairs all in a row, right? If we are watching television and every other show is Law and Order in a different city, right? Or CSI in a different city, we think that that's legitimate when every show casts the police as catching the bad guys as if the police are not the bad guys. We swallow that, right? We swallow the notion that it is a mother, a biological mother, that is solely responsible for the care and upbringing of her biological children. And we swallow that. We don't have to swallow that, right? We don't have to. And, you know, I always invoke the wisdom of my children, but I'll give a quick example. You all saw, I think you saw what happened at Howard University in fall of this academic year, when the students at Howard put out what was happening in the dorms, that they were unfit living conditions. Well, true to who I raised her to be, the viral video of the water pouring out the walls and the black mold inside the walls was my oldest daughter, Tandiwe, who's 18 years old. And when she put out the video, she didn't ask me before she put it out. Now, mind you, I'm also a Howard alumna, and I'm paying to send my daughter to Howard, right? And I have great pride in being a Bison. So she had posted the video, and then the university started targeting her, actually called the police on her for she had gotten some media attention before things really picked up. And I said to her, Tandiwe, I don't even understand what you're doing. At least they're fixing, you know, the leak in your wall. I don't even understand. What did you think it was going to be when you went away to college and lived in a dorm? You thought you were going to be living in a lap of luxury? Shoot, all the dorms were like that. She lives also in the same dorm that I lived in when I went to Howard. I said, all the dorms were like that when I lived there. We all lived like that. And that's just what dorms are. And she paused for a quick second, and then she looked me in the eye and said, well, they shouldn't be. And I said, well, damn, you know what? She's right. That I was going with a system because I had been socialized to believe that that's just what college life is. And of course you have mold in your dorm room, black mold in your dorm room, and there's rats and all of that. That's just what it is. She said, no, but we don't have to submit to that. That's not, they shouldn't be. That's not what dorm rooms should be, right? That was her resistance. So that's what I mean by choosing a site of resistance, right? Where do you refuse to submit and choose to fight? Does that make sense, Ebony? Yeah. So anybody else, and I talked too long on that example, anybody else want to offer their site of resistance? So we got one, we need two more.
I'm just gonna say that anytime I correct someone on my pronouns being they, them, that's an act of resistance. That's just as a trans person, just taking up space is an act of resistance. So publicly introducing myself and making sure that that's like a line that I can cross.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you. Anybody else? Kelly.
I was thinking about workplaces as sites of resistance. Think about the shitty conditions that most workplaces, not ours at SJP, but most workplaces are terrible, and we're conditioned to accept terrible wages and terrible work environments. And I feel like I actively fight against a lot of bad workplaces as sites of resistance.
That's right. That's right. And you know what, Kelly, I feel like especially in social justice workplaces, because we're working in our passion area, right? So I'm an educator. And so because I choose to engage in education with working class students, the thought is, okay, you should be in it because your heart is in it. And so some of our folks, especially our lecturer faculty in the Cal State system, qualify for food stamps and housing support, right? And why should they? Why should they? We should be resisting that, right? Absolutely. Anybody else? Or was that three? That was three. Anybody else before we move on? Okay. So I want to just share this homework, this last homework. Somebody saying the family unit. The family unit to me is one of the hardest ones, right? Because you love these people, right? Sometimes in the place, sometimes you love the people and sometimes you don't, right? But in the family unit, most of the time, we love these people, or at least we're tied to them. There's a tie to them. And so how do you resist within the family unit, right? So here's your homework. One is to identify your site of resistance, at least one. 2, revisit or write your vision statement. 3 is to figure out your piece of the work. Carve out your piece of the work. So we want to make sure that we break down our vision into goals, which again are systemic level, and then break it down from there into objectives, which are project level. What is something that you are going to do, right? So us being in Buffalo right now is not going to, we'll be here till Sunday. That is not going to end white supremacy, but it's a project that we hope will have tangible outcomes, because we're also giving everybody who's coming, and if you feel like hopping on a plane and joining us, please come on. You have time to get here still. But we're giving people assignments, right? We're saying Buffalo is ground zero and white supremacy is everywhere. So now we want you to go back and do this work in your own communities, right? So that's a project level, an objective, a project level objective, right? Where we can say tangibly, this is something that we know begins to undo a system of white supremacy, which is the racial power structure in this country and in this world. And then commit to a space and clear building practice, right? So where are you going to be for the long haul? Who are your people, right? What beloved community are you joining or building? And then what is your particular contribution, an ongoing contribution? So we can't just leave Buffalo on Sunday and say, we done now. I did that project, right? The next thing is, what is my ongoing work. And so on Monday, we're going to be presenting the People's Budget Survey results. That's going to chip away. That's going to continue to undo white supremacist, patriarchal, heteronormative capitalism. So that is your homework. Identify a site of resistance, revisit your vision statement or write one, carve out your piece of the work, and then commit to a space and clear building practice. And that's what I have for you today. What questions or thoughts or ideas do you have before we go? We got about 2 minutes. Questions, thoughts, ideas before we hop off. Yes, Bijal.
Can you repost, if you have it, this slide with the information or like the directions for the vision statement? I think it was
Sure. Actually, better than that, Michelle, do you have it that you can email?
Yes.
Someone sent it to
Yeah,
me
and
last
it's also on the course hub and the syllabus, so I'll link that here.
Okay. I'll look there. Thanks.
Great. I think it'll just be easier than looking at it on the screen because it has a lot of different things. Yeah.
Oh, sorry. Did you mean the prompt or the slide that you shared? Because I don't have the slides.
The
that you
prompt.
have. Oh,
Okay. So you don't have that. You don't have the slide.
I don't have the slide, but I have this prompt.
Okay, let me send you the slide, and then if you can send that out, that would be great. So everybody has that.
Okay.
Anything else? Any other questions? All right. Well, thank y'all. Next week. Hello. Hi, Rebecca's child. Now we feel good. Now we can be done for the night. All right. So looking forward to seeing y'all next week for our final class. Thank you all so much.